Welcome back. Last time I began to give a critique of this book, Coming to Grips with Genesis, Biblical Authority in the Age of the Earth by Terry Mortensen and Thane Uri, editors. And I said last time that I think that the argument from Genesis itself and from the rest of Scripture that the days of creation must be 24-hour days is not a very persuasive argument. It's not a bad argument. That is to say, there's nothing in the text of Scripture I can see that clearly excludes that possibility. But I think there's plenty of reason for us to question it and to want to look further. I don't believe that we can say that the matter is settled on the basis of the arguments that they have made here. A second major argument they make has to do with animal death. And in my opinion, this is actually their strongest argument. For my money, the strongest argument the young earth creationists have is the argument that death of animals must have begun only after the sin of Adam. That it can't be that for billions of years animals were dying even before human beings were created. I think that's their strongest argument. What I'm going to say though today is this: I don't believe that that argument is decisive. For this reason, I do not believe the Scripture explicitly teaches that animals did not die before the sin of Adam, nor do I think that Scripture teaches that through necessary inference. Now, what do I mean by that? As believers in Scripture, we are constrained to believe everything the Bible explicitly teaches us, and anything that is a logical conclusion that you cannot evade from what Scripture teaches. Just as an example, the Bible never says anything about Buddhism. So the Bible never says specifically that you cannot be saved by calling on the name of Buddha, does it? It's not there. But the Bible does say that apart from the name of Christ, there is no other name under heaven given to men by which we must be saved. So it seems to me to follow very logically and necessarily. It's a necessary inference from that text of Scripture that you cannot be saved by calling upon the Buddha. That's a necessary inference, but many inferences are not necessary. They do not rise to that level. They are not logically entailed in such a way that you must believe them because of what the Scripture teaches. And what I would argue about animal death is that while the argument that is made that animals did not die until Adam sinned seems to be a good argument and is an argument that makes good sense of the passages of Scripture when you put them all together, it is still an argument based upon non-necessary inferences, and it does not rise to the level of a proof. Let me explain this to you by walking through the text with you. Let's start with Genesis chapter 3. In Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve have sinned, and God then gives a punishment to the serpent. That's verse 14. And then verse 16, he punishes the woman by saying that he will surely multiply her pain in childbirth. Interesting, isn't it, that he doesn't say that she will begin to have pain in childbirth. It appears that perhaps childbirth would have been painful even without the sin, but it is greatly multiplied because of her sin. And then verse 17, to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. Now, it is commonly said that at that point, when Adam was punished and the ground was cursed because of him, nature underwent radical change. Some have suggested it was at that time that the second law of thermodynamics came into effect and decay first came into the creation. It is suggested that at that point animals that had previously been herbivorous became carnivorous. They grew teeth and fangs. The lions and the orcas grew teeth, and the T-Rexes grew teeth so that they could eat other creatures. Is that stated in Genesis chapter 3? No, it's not. The text says nothing about animals, does it? All the text says is that God is giving a punishment to the man. He's going to have to labor for his food, and the punishment comes through a curse on the ground. The ground produces thistles. Now that could mean that all of nature was affected, that the laws of nature were changed. That's possible. That's not a necessary inference. The focus is entirely upon the impact upon the man, not at all upon the impact on nature as a whole. There's nothing here about animals suddenly becoming carnivorous. Nothing to suggest that at that point animals first began to die. That could be true, but the text just doesn't say it. Let's go on to Romans chapter 5. In Romans chapter 5, verse 12, we read this: "Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. For sin indeed was in the world before the law was given, but sin is not counted where there is no law. Yet death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those whose sinning was not like the transgression of Adam, who was a type of the one who was to come." It's said that when Adam died, death entered the world, and that means not only human death, but animal death. Does Paul say anything about animals in this passage? He does not. He is talking entirely about human beings here. He is creating a contrast between Christ and Adam. Adam was the first man. Through him, death entered the world. Christ is the second Adam. Through him, justification, life enters the world. Well, Christ does not justify the animals. He justifies human beings who trust in him. The entire focus of the passage is solely upon human beings. Could it be, that is it compatible with this passage, to say that animals also began to die when Adam began to die? Yeah, it's possible. Does the text say that explicitly? Certainly not. Does it even imply it in such a form as to be a logically entailed implication of the passage? No, it does not. It's simply not there. Go on to Romans chapter 8, another passage that is frequently used, beginning at verse 19. Romans 8, "For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know," verse 22, "that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now." Well, it's argued that the creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth ever since the fall of Adam. And that's very possible. Does verse 22 say that? No, it says, "We know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now." Paul does not say from what time until now. Could be from the time of Adam's fall, yes. On the other hand, very often in a sentence, if you say something has happened until now and you do not specify a beginning point, the beginning point is the very beginning. And so it's grammatically possible that this sentence means that the creation has been groaning as in childbirth ever since the beginning of the creation. What is the creation groaning for? What's it waiting for? It's waiting for the revealing of the sons of God, verse 19. What does that mean? Well, it can't just mean human beings. The world is full of human beings, but the creation still seems to be groaning. Can't just mean Christians. The world has many, many Christians, but the world is still groaning. What are the sons of God? It seems to me that this phrase must refer to the perfected children of God, the perfected Christians, that is, people who have been made complete in holiness, people who have been set free from not only their current sin, but even the threat of sin, people who have been confirmed in holiness, as the theological tradition speaks of. The creation was made by God to be ruled over by human beings, made in the image of God's own Son, holy and full of grace, and reflecting perfectly the image of God. That's what creation is longing for. Creation is waiting for that, and it hasn't happened yet. Now, someone will say, well, it's impossible that the creation could have been groaning even before the fall of man, because in the book of Genesis, we're told that God created the world and declared it very good. I think that's Genesis 1:31. And very good, necessarily, we're told, means that there couldn't have been such a thing as animals dying, couldn't have been such a thing as decay. Well, I'm not so sure about that. The Hebrew very good is tov ma'od. And in the Hebrew Bible, this does not normally mean perfection. I'm not sure that it ever means perfection. Rebecca is described as Tov Ma'od, or very beautiful. That's Genesis 24:16. The promised land is described as Tov Ma'od, or exceedingly good. That's Numbers 14:17. In neither of these cases would we say that we're talking about perfection, that Rebekah was perfect or that the promised land was perfect. No, Tov Ma'od means very good in terms of the purpose of this person or the person or this thing. That is, Tov Ma'od means that something is as it ought to be. When God created the world and declared it Tov Ma'od, he was saying that he created it as he wanted it to be. Nothing hindered him from creating the creation he wanted to create. It was according to his purpose, according to his plan. The word Tov is used by Joseph when, after being sold into slavery, he says that God intended it for good, Tov, so that many people would be saved from famine. That doesn't mean that it was a perfect thing that his brothers sold him into slavery, but it was good. It fulfilled God's good purposes. I don't think anywhere in Scripture does Tov Ma'od or Tov by itself necessarily imply perfection. And there are Hebrew words that do imply that. So to me it seems entirely possible that God created a world that from the beginning was very good. It was what God wanted to make, but he made it imperfect. He made it waiting. He made it to be in a state of longing for and groaning for the appearing of the sons of God. I mean, imagine this kind of scenario. This is a little bit different from the traditional understanding of these verses, but humor me for a moment. God creates the world. He creates it precisely as he wants it to be. He declares it very good, but he creates it imperfect because it's waiting for the apex of God's creation, which is human beings made in God's image and confirmed in holiness. He creates Adam and Eve, puts them in a garden. Conditions in the garden are probably different from the conditions outside the garden, otherwise why put them in the garden? And why would the expulsion from the garden be a punishment? Within the garden, Adam and Eve are put on trial. They're given an opportunity to remain faithful to God. And in principle, had they done so, probably they would have been confirmed in holiness at that point. That is, from that point on, they would not even have experienced temptation to sin had they withstood that initial temptation. And we would have been born without temptation to sin. I mean, we believe that God can do that, right? In heaven, we're not going to be tempted to sin. It's possible for God to confirm us in holiness. Presumably that would have happened had Adam and Eve not sinned. And perhaps at that point, the world outside the garden would have become like the world inside the garden. Perhaps at that point, the creation which had been groaning in futility, longing for the appearing of the sons of God, would have ceased to groan as in childbirth because they would have been present. The sons of God would be there. But of course, Adam and Eve did sin. And now the creation continues to groan until the appearing of those who have been redeemed by Jesus Christ and set free from the power of sin, their spirits made perfect, their bodies resurrected. The creation will groan until the time that God makes a new heaven and a new earth, and human beings take their rightful place governing the earth. Am I sure that's the right interpretation of these verses? No, I'm not. Is it a possible interpretation of these verses? I think so. I think it is. Now, there is a verse that I think is harder to fit into this pattern, and that is the passage in the first chapter of Genesis. Let me see, is it 29 or is it 31? It's 29, I think, where it says that God gave, verse 30, God gave to every beast of the earth and to every bird of the heavens everything that has breath of life. He gave them every green plant for food. Genesis 1:30. Now, that seems to imply that animals were originally not carnivorous, doesn't it? And I haven't found a really good alternative explanation for that. Some have said that it means simply that plants are the base of the food chain. I guess that's possible. I'm not quite sure why that would be stated at this point. I'm not sure how to interpret that other than according to the traditional reading that says that animals and human beings were originally vegetarian. But again, I need to say this. When we draw that conclusion, we are drawing an inference from this passage, and an inference that is not necessary. In other words, what we're told here is something positive. God gave to people and to animals every green plant for food. We're not told that God did not give to some animals the ability and the right to eat other animals. Far less are we told that animals didn't die. There's no place in the Bible that tells us when animals began to die. And there's no place in the Bible that tells us when animals began to eat one another. And Genesis 1:30 is, I think, very logically read as saying that animals did not originally eat one another, but it does not necessarily imply that. What am I saying? Am I saying that the traditional reading of these passages is completely wrong? No, I'm not in a position to say that. I am, I think, in a position to say this, at least for myself. I want to see what the sciences say. I want to see whether there is real evidence of animal death before human existence, before the creation of human beings. I want to know the evidence, because I think the passages, while they have traditionally been understood and as saying that animals did not die before the creation of human beings, do not necessarily teach that. You can draw that inference from these passages, but it is not a necessary inference. And so this is not the kind of slam dunk argument that should allow us to say we don't need to look any further. We don't need to understand what is said by paleontologists or by geologists. No, we still have to press on to look at the evidence that comes to us from the sciences. We're getting closer, but we're not going to do it quite yet. Next time, I want to talk about the argument from history. The church has traditionally believed that the days of creation were 24-hour days. That's been an interpretation that's been around from the very beginning, or at least from the earliest centuries. Does that itself prove to us that this interpretation is right? That's what I want to talk about next time. Thanks for watching.